Today we're going to be talking about how we can unwrap a model after we've created it. And the reason why we would unwrap a model is if we wanted to texture it. And unwrapping just basically means taking a 3D object and flattening it out onto a 2D plane so that we can then create and apply a material to it. So let's look at a couple of different ways. There's two main ones that I want to go over, and I'll go over probably two shapes in one video and this more complex shape in another video. So with this box, I'm going to use what's called a UVW Map, which is basically telling 3ds Max, can you try to do this unwrap for me? And so what I'm going to do is go to my modifier list, and I apologize, it doesn't let me go all the way down to the bottom to show you. But instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to type in UVW Map, and we have a UVW Map. Now, what this does is it gives me several different options to try to manipulate the UVs for this object. And I have a material that I've already created, and it's kind of silly, but that's well, let's use this one first. So we can kind of see by default, we have planar by default, and that doesn't really work for us. So let's try some other things, maybe cylindrical, and it gives us our bounding box or what it's trying to use, and we can scale that if we want. Let's scale the box, that's not what we want to do. We can use our object here to try to scale it. And then if we have a cap, if we want to try to do the cap on our cylinder, but that doesn't quite work for us. So maybe spherical, which again is a sphere, doesn't really work for a box. Shrink wrap, box, which for this works for us. We also have face, but that can work, and then it can also not work. We can see that our texture, these were all perfect squares, and we see them kind of stretched out. They're more like rectangles. What that means is that if we create a texture, it will also be stretched. And then we can UVW XYZ to UVW. That doesn't really work for us. We can change the length, width, and height that we saw with the cylindrical. Now, even if we do a box, we can still change that as well. Let's maybe change that to, I don't know, 5, 5, and 5. We can see how it multiplies. If we wanted to scale that out to just fit our box, we can do that. And if any of those don't work, we can kind of stretch it or move those values until we have those perfect boxes again. We want those boxes to be as perfect as we can get them. And we can see that even the box doesn't quite work. Face works a little bit better, but we're still not quite there. So this is good for like a general thing. Maybe let's see another material, maybe the happy face. Have a happy face on there, and it doesn't quite work for any of them really. So from here, we could go to, from a UVW map, because that's not really working very well for us, we can go to an unwrap UVW. So I'm going to delete this, and I'm going to type in unwrap UVW. And what this allows us to do is we get to customize how our UVs are laid out. So from here, UVW, unwrap UVW, let's go over a couple of things. Okay, so the first one I want to go over is here, where we can, well, first let's open our UV editor. I guess that would be a good thing to do. And we'll go over the UV editor as well. Here we have vertex. If we want to select the vertices of our object, you can see how objects in red are those that we have selected. Then we have edge, which these would be the edges of our objects. And then we have a polygon. Okay. Underneath that, we can either grow our selection or shrink our selection. Next, under select by, this right here, ignore back facing. That means that if I select the front of an object, the back facing part of it or the underneath or the back side won't be selected. I usually try to turn that off because I do a lot of drag selecting where I want more than one thing, or if I have, several things that I want to select here. You can also turn that on if you want to select just one face. So for example, I want to take all these faces and move them, and I can do that. And then edit UVs, where we have open the UV editor, which is what we did, and tweak and view. We have the quick planar map, which kind of takes the place of these projection maps right here that we'll go over in just a minute, but it does it really quickly. There's not a whole lot of options there. Then display quick planar map, which we have here, all these here, and then align quick planar map based on the faces. So we'll get into all those, maybe not all of these tools. We can reset our UVs if we don't like how they're going. Quick peel, which is kind of relatively new. We can, quick peel is good for more complex shapes or rounded shapes, or we want to try to flatten them out. And we'll get into those a little bit. So first, let's go into how we can unwrap this object here. And we'll take a look in the UV editor and how we can do that. And a lot of the tools that we had before are here as well. So selecting vertex, edge, polygon, growing our selection. We also have loops and edges, so we can do those as well. So for example, the top here, let's go to edges. This top loop, if I select one, and then I select my loop, it will select all those that are connected to it. Let's see what we have here, ring. So ring is the same thing, except instead of a loop of an object, it selects the rings. So think about going all the way around. It's not necessarily connected like a loop would be. It's just the side edges, so to speak. Then we can also paint our selection, which personally I don't use that too much. Then we have in our quick transformation, some of these tools can help us, and we're not going to go over all the tools, but some of them can help us. So for example, if I had a vertex that I wanted to move, rotate, or scale, and they weren't quite even, and I wanted them to be perfectly aligned. So I can select the ones that I want to be aligned, and I can either choose horizontal or vertical. So since I want these horizontal, I can choose that horizontal, and it will then make those perfectly horizontal. I can do the same thing with vertical. Awesome. So that can help with some of your selections. And what I'm going to do is go back to the checkerboard texture here, because I want to show how we can make all of these planes that make up the box perfectly square, and we can have the texture look perfectly square. So for a box, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come to Polygon, select everything. Then we have some of these things up here. So let's go to Mapping and Flatten Mapping. So this is going to take everything that we have selected, and it's going to flatten it into its most basic shapes. And we're saying anything that's 0 to 44.9 degrees, we're going to flatten. If it's more than that, then we'll connect them together. So we're just going to flatten it. And here we see every different side of our box. And what we can see here is that on every side of our box, our squares are perfectly square, which means our texture is not going to be distorted at all from how we have it on here. The issue, though, is that we have all of these different squares and none of them are connected. So if I wanted to have something, for example, a signature that went across one face of the box onto the other, it would be very hard to line that up in a program like Photoshop or GIMP or any kind of program that you wanted to use. MS Paint, that's fine. So what we're going to go over now is how we can kind of stitch these together. So what I like to do is I like to get all of my polygons off of this square right here. This is going to be where my texture is going to be. This is my working area. So what I'm going to do is decide, okay, which polygon do I want to be the most important? Which one do I want to be seen the most? And for what I'm going to do, I'm going to say this polygon here is going to be my most important polygon. I'm going to move that down here somewhere. And then I'm going to try to determine what connects to it. And 3ds Max tells us that already. If we take a look at these other boxes with this box selected, we see green lines and blue lines. the blue lines represent the sides that connect to this box in some way or another. Right now we have 4 different ones. That's too many. But we can further refine that by selecting edge. And then if we select one edge of the object, we can see that this object here is the only one with the blue line. So we know this polygon connects to this polygon along this line, along this edge. We can even further refine it by saying a vertex. So I'm going to select this vertex. And then here I see that this one vertex connects and this vertex connects. So what I can do is I can select this object here, and I'm going to move it down here so that they're overlapping, and I can get as detailed as I want, as accurate as I want, and just keep moving in. And I'm using my mouse button, my middle scroll, to zoom in and out. And then I just hover over, and when my mouse changes, I can just grab it and pull it over. Okay. So we're pretty good. Now in the UVs, that's pretty good. They'll be overlapping, and if we had an object that went across, it would show on both planes, this plane and this plane. Okay? But as we can see, all these lines are still green, and green means that they're not really connected to anything else. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select my vertex and select these vertex that are supposed to connect together. And I'm going to go to Tools, and we have a lot of different tools, but the one that I'm looking for is Weld Selected. Okay. Now when I welded it and they were close enough together, and we saw that they did join, and they joined, and we know they joined because we have the green lines and we have this white line. This white line means they're connected. I can move this object, and now let's work on the same thing down here. So we have this face right here and these two that connect to it. So since this one has two vertices, the ones that I had selected, both connect. I'm just going to bring that back. Line that up by eye. Tools, Weld Selected. And we do have a shortcut key, so Control plus W will do this for you. Let's see. Let's see which side this is. The top. So we're going top, side, bottom. Okay. Now, everything inside this square right here is going to be where our texture goes. So anything outside of it, we're just going to repeat to the other side. And that might be a little confusing, but when I get a texture on here, it'll be a little bit easier to see. So what I'm going to do is, since I have to try to fit everything in here, I'm going to scale all these objects down a little bit. So I can try to get them all to fit. Okay, move that back towards the center. And let's go here. Okay, so we have this object here, but what we see, if we look at our vertices here, this vertex is connected here, and this vertex is connected here. Well, so it's 90 degrees off. So what we can do is we can rotate it by 90 degrees, and I'm going to make sure that my angle snap is turned on. Then I'm going to rotate 90 degrees. Now let's see if they line up, and they do. They will. So I'll take this object, and I'm going to move it and connect it. Tools, Weld Selected. Now we see that they are welded because that line turned from green to white. All right, on this side, we have here, so let's go ahead and rotate that by 90 degrees. I'm going to move that down here. Try to move them so that they're aligned. Select them, Tools, Weld Selected. Okay, and we have this last object. Okay, so what we see here is these vertices are connected to these vertices. So we can rotate this by 180 degrees. We also have this tool up here, so we can mirror it. But for what we have right here, mirroring it wouldn't do what we wanted it to be. We would still have to mirror it back because this vertex would then be in line with this one, but still wanting to be aligned with this vertex. So instead, we're just going to rotate it 180 degrees. Okay. Rotate. That's done. We'll align them, select both of them. Tools, weld selected. Okay. Now I'm going to try to fit everything in here, which it does pretty. Okay, we're going to scale that up a little bit. We want to try to take up as much room in here as we can. Since this is the only space that we have for our textures, we want to try to use all that space so we don't have anything wasted. Okay. Now one other thing that can help us is we can actually see a texture that we're trying to fit it to. And we can do that here, where it says checkerboard. By default, it's a checkerboard. Where we can come in and choose one that we already have on there, or we can pick another texture. So what I'm going to do is pick a texture, go to bitmap, and I'm going to go to where I have my happy face. And it will show it here. So right now, if I were to apply that happy face texture to my box, what I would see is it's aligned exactly how it is here. And so although this doesn't work if we have it done this way, we can also export out this UVW to create a texture. So that's what I'm going to do. In order to do that, I'm going to go to Tools and then Render UVW Template, but I have to make sure that this is active, and we know it's active because it's blue. So Tools, Render UVW Template, and then I'm going to give it a height or width and a height. By default, it's 1024 by 1024. And especially for video games, you want to stay within that power of 2. And if you're not sure what a power of 2 means, then I would invite you to go look that up on the internet. But basically, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, 256, 512, so on and so forth. So for the bigger this number is, the more the bigger that file is going to be. So I'm just going to say like 128 by 128. Okay, and then everything else I usually just leave it alone. And then we're going to render that UVW template. And here we have that UVW template that's rendered, and we can save that out and bring that into 3ds Max. So just for the sake of it, I'm going to go ahead and save that and save it as a JPEG. And I'm going to just say square UVW. I want to try to label it so I know what it is. Save. Okay. So now that I have this done and unwrapped, I want to make sure that I save this unwrap. And one easy way to do that is just to convert this to an editable poly or convert it to something. And that UVW map, even though it's not there, or unwrap UVW, although it's not there, those UVs are saved. And we can see that because with our texture, our face still looks all kinds of weird. So what I'm going to do really quick is I'm going to create a texture inside of Photoshop, and then I'll come back and we'll bring it in and see exactly what we were talking about with how those vertices and edges and faces all being connected can help us with our texture. Okay, so I took that UVW map and I made a texture out of it, and I've got that texture loaded. Now I'm going to apply that texture to my shape. I can either click and drag and pull it over to it, or I can say here, assign material to selection and show shaded material in the viewport. And what we see is this quick little texture that I made for the box. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put another Unwrap UVW on there so that I can show you what the UVs in the texture looks like. And we'll go over a couple of things that I'd like to talk about in that as well. So if I open up UVW, which we had before, here we have our UVWs. Then I'm going to choose that texture that I just made. So bitmap, I'm going to come down to here and show it. There's a couple of things that I want to talk about. Again, like we said, because our UVs are connected, this green line flows between all of the sides, and it doesn't look like it's any kind of shearing or anything like that, or it's out of place. It's flowing very nicely on the face between one and another. Now this purple here, we're going to take a look at the purple. We can see where the UVs are being shown and the purple square. And also on the red, we can see that we don't necessarily have to have our UVs perfect with our texture. Anything outside those UVs, however, won't be shown. It's not shown on the model anywhere. So this is good because we can have a little bit of buffer if we're trying to color or if we're trying to do something complex. We don't have to stay perfectly within the lines and it will still show. However, like we said, we want to try to use up all this space that we can because this is the only space that we have for our texture. If we go outside, it will start to repeat itself. So we don't have added detail just because we go out here. Now, there are some ways that we can use that to our advantage. So for example, if we have a repeating texture and we have it either horizontally or vertically, then if we go outside of this box here, since if we go outside, it will just show what's on the other side. If it's a repeating texture, we can actually get a little bit more detail in there using less space. Maybe I'll do a little video about that, but that's the only thing I want to talk about on this video because we are getting kind of long. Okay, so we've got our square here. Now let's quickly do our cylinder. So again, I'm going to create a UVW or an unwrapped UVW. And I'm going to open that up and I'm just going to do this really quickly because we are getting kind of long. I'm going to apply our checkerboard so we can see what it looks like by default. And we can see that our squares are more rectangles. So that doesn't work for us. So I'm going to select everything and I'm going to use our scale. I'm going to click and hold and I'm going to scale horizontally until these side pieces start to get more square. So I'm going outside the box, but it's okay because I'm going to fix it. All right, so those are pretty square there. And I'm going to go back to my uniform square and scale it in until it fits inside my box. And you can see that they're still pretty square, but now my tops are messed up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a planar map for the top and the bottom. So here under projection, I'm going to do a planar map. Now we do have options for cylindrical map and spherical map and box map, and I'll let you play around with those. I'll give you a basic idea of what they do, which really we can infer by the name of it. Like this we could use for a cylinder and a sphere and a box and whatnot. But I'm going to use planar for just this plane right here. And the square we see, this is what it's using for our planar map. We can see that it is in what axis it is, which should be by default Z axis. Then we're going to click on that planar map, and now we can see that it has taken the planar area and put whatever we had selected inside of our work area. To move it or do anything else, I need to make sure that this is turned off, so I'm going to click it again. Then I can move that object. I'm going to do the same for the bottom. Click planar on the Z and move that object. And what we can do, again, like we did with the box, let's figure out where these connect. So we can see that this here connects over here, about here. You can see that that connects there. So if I want them to connect, if I want to weld them, I'm going to have to rotate that until they're aligned and then scale this object down. Okay, so we're getting pretty far along in this video, and I don't want to keep it too long, so we'll stop right there on how to unwrap basic shapes. And I would invite you to continue to practice and practice with the primitive shapes, your squares, your spheres, your cylinders, and whatnot. And in our next video, we're going to talk about unwrapping a more complex shape, which is basically a lot of the same tools that we just did, but there are a couple of little tricks that we can do. And we have to start thinking about how we want our UV layout to be. So until then, go ahead and keep practicing and have fun.